Okay, here we are talking about type 1 and type 2 errors. And assuming you already understand what a hypothesis test is and that we would be, taking a look at situations where we could possibly make a mistake, because remember, hypothesis test doesn't prove anything. We're just basing our decisions on probabilities. And so, in all likelihood, we make the correct decisions, but there's still a chance that we can make something incorrect. So, what we mean by that is that, if we take a look at this scenario here, for instance, and again, it just defines what a populate or what a error is. So, if we reject a null hypothesis when it's true, we call that a type 1 error, right? Because this is true and we're rejecting it. If we fail to reject it when it's false, that's also a mistake, right? So, if we put it in the context down here, this kind of this two-way table, we know the null is either true or it's false, okay? And when the null is false, then by default, the alternative is going to be true, okay? So we obviously have a decision to make. We're either going to reject the null or we're going to fail to reject it. So obviously, again, rejecting the null when it's true, that's that first type of error up here. That's the type 1 error. If we fail to reject it when it's false, okay, because if it's false, we want to reject it, right? Then we call that a type 2 error. So we can see that summarized down here. So obviously, the decisions we want to make, right, are first of all, rejecting the null when in fact it's false. That's a correct decision. And also, if the null is true, we don't reject it or fail to reject it. Okay, so these are the things that we're kind of focusing on here. And this first column here, this type 1 error, is one in which these two things are going to be complementary to one another, just as these are. And so this idea of subjectively determining that's our alpha, right? That gives us the ability to say, okay, well, what type of risk am I willing to make in order to have a type 1 error? And that might just be in the consequence of what's going on here. So on this next slide, what I want to do is just show, when we make this type 1 error and type 2 error, what type of mistakes what would be the consequences of making such a mistake. Okay, so if I move over here again, this was the scenario that we were talking about in the last video and the hypotheses I had here. So just to kind of review this, we got a big truck pulls up, and I'm just summarizing this. It's full of potatoes. We're willing to accept 8% having blemishes, because blemishes, again, are something that make the chip look bad, but that don't really make it unsafe to eat or anything like that. And so we're either going to accept that truckload or not. And we don't have time to take, a look at every single potato. And so, what we do is we take a look at a sample and run this hypothesis test, which I addressed, again, in the last video. So now, so we can make a type 1 or type 2 error. So a type 1, again, is rejecting this null here when in fact it's true. So if we put that in the context, we said, well, we would conclude we're rejecting it. We're saying that more than 8% of these potatoes have blemishes, when in fact only 8% or maybe even less have blemishes, okay? So the consequence would be rejecting potatoes that were acceptable. Okay, and I misspelled that word there. That should be acceptable. Sometimes mistakes you make. Okay, acceptable to make potato chips. What would be the consequence of that? We sent away good potatoes. That's basically what we're doing here. Okay, and that is a mistake. We should take them. Well, this may cause downtime in the factory. And, in other words, you got people getting paid, you're there at the factory, you don't have any potatoes to make chips with. Now, I may be oversimplifying this scenario here, but that, again, would be a possible consequence. On the flip side of that, let's say we make the other error. Let's just say this is true Okay, but we stick with this. Well, now what we're doing is we're essentially taking the potatoes. Okay, I mean, this is true, right? More than 8%, but we're saying no, we'll take them. Well, now what we're doing is we're making more faulty, potato chips. Okay, or potato chips with faulty potatoes. And so, you have to kind of weigh these out. Now, there's ways of addressing these, lowering these probabilities. This one's an easy remedy. We just choose a lower alpha. Okay. If we're going to make this mistake, let's make it really unlikely. Let's pick an alpha like 0.01, or, that would be traditionally what you would do. Okay. Likewise here, we're not going to get into how to calculate probability of type 2 errors. Are pretty lengthy, and it's not a topic that's discussed in this course, but let me just give you the remedy. The remedy is actually to increase the sample size, and what that does is lower this probability of this type 2 error, because there is a tie-in in that computation of what the alpha is. So once that's set, we can continue to lower this probability by increasing the sample size. So I can't explain all of that until we understood why or how we would compute those values. But then there's another probability that we would compute, which is the complement of the type 2, which is actually power. And that's the probability of detecting that error. But we'll just leave it at that, because those power and probability, computing probability of type 2 errors are not discussed in this course. Okay, you just have to understand what a type 1 and a type 2 error is in terms of something like this in the context of a problem. So, or something like this. So we'll address those in the specific ALEKS problems that you have here. I got one more video coming up here on the t-distribution, and kind of addresses this idea of not knowing the population standard deviation, okay, when we do a hypothesis test. We talked a little bit about William Gossett in the last week when we were talking about confidence intervals, because we use t-distributions, and we're going to use them again here for a hypothesis test. So, all right, we'll see you next video.